She had spent her whole life running from her past, from the mirror, from the parts of herself she feared to face. But in the silence of that room, with the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders, Lena finally realized something. The hardest thing wasn't confronting the darkness outside. It was staring into the depths of her own reflection, and accepting that she had been running from herself all along. And now, with the door in front of her, the only question that remained was, would she step through, or finally choose to stay and heal? Dr. Lena Moritz was always calm. Even in the most trying of situations, be it a frantic patient, a difficult diagnosis, or a sleepless night, her face rarely betrayed anything but focused serenity. She had built her career on understanding the mind, navigating the maze of cognitive distortions and helping her patients unravel the mysteries that tangled their thoughts. But there was something unsettling about the patient sitting across from her today. "Doctor," the woman said, her voice shaking slightly. "There's something in the room. I don't know how to explain it. It's like a presence, and it's always there." Lena tilted her head, her fingers lightly tapping on the armrest of her chair. She'd seen it all: hallucinations, delusions, and various manifestations of psychosis. But there was a peculiar edge to Sarah's words. It wasn't like the usual fear of a shadow or an imaginary friend. No, this was different, more insidious. "Can you tell me more about this presence?" Lena asked softly, her voice calm, yet curious. Sarah swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for the invisible thing. "It's not like a person, it's just a feeling, like ... The room itself is alive, like it knows something. And when I look into the mirror, I hear it whispering." Lena froze. She had heard variations of this before, patients who spoke of voices in the dark, of rooms that seemed to change when they weren't looking. But a mirror, it was an old, almost cliché manifestation in the world of psychological horror, something out of a ghost story. Lena had even read case studies in graduate school that mentioned the phenomenon, but this wasn't supposed to happen in real life. Not in the world of cognitive therapy and scientific research. "I want you to try something," Lena said, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest now, her mind processing the information. "Next time you hear the whispers, I want you to focus on the sound. Try to identify what it's saying." Sarah's eyes widened. "I can't. It's not meant for me. It doesn't want me to hear it. When I try, it gets louder, closer, almost like it's inside my head." Lena scribbled a few notes on her pad, her eyes narrowing in thought. Could this be a form of auditory hallucination, like the ones she had studied so many times before? Or was it something more? Her patients hadn't fully articulated. There was no clear explanation, but one thing was certain: Sarah was terrified. "I want you to keep a journal," Lena said finally, standing up. "Every time the whispers happen, write it down. What the voice says, how you feel, what's in the room with you. We'll meet again in a week, and I'll review everything. But, for now, I want you to stay calm. This is a manageable symptom." Sarah didn't seem reassured. She nodded, but her hand was trembling as she picked up her purse, her eyes never leaving Lena's face. That evening after Sarah had left, Lena sat in her office, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above making the room feel colder. She was accustomed to patients who believed they were hearing voices, people suffering from trauma, grief, or paranoia. But something about Sarah's case bothered her. The mention of the mirror felt oddly familiar, like a piece of a puzzle she hadn't quite remembered. Lena stared at the bookshelf in the corner of the room, her eyes drifting over the well-worn books on cognitive distortions, behavioral therapy, and memory reconstruction. Yet, gaze kept returning to one particular volume, The Phenomenology of Space and Mind. It was a dense text, more philosophy than psychology, but it had always intrigued her. She had never really read it in full, but something about it called to her now. Reaching for the book, Lena opened it to a random page. Her eyes skimmed the words, but then a passage caught her attention. "The mind cannot fully comprehend the idea of a room that exists outside the temporal and spatial boundaries of the body. When such a room is perceived, it evokes an immediate and profound response: disorientation, fear, and often the sensation of being trapped within one's own mind." Lena's heart skipped a beat. The description was too close to Sarah's experience to ignore. A room that exists outside the body, a room that changes when you look away. The hairs on her neck stood on end as she read on. "The echoing room, as it has been termed by some patients, is a psychological anomaly. Those who experience it are often unaware of the full implications of their perceptions. They believe they are seeing hallucinations, but what they are encountering may be something entirely different, a manifestation of the mind's deep-seated fears and suppressed memories." Lena closed the book with a snap. A shiver ran down her spine. The term echoing room rang in her ears, but she couldn't recall where she'd encountered it before. She had to know more. Was this just a curious coincidence, or was there something more to it? The next morning, Lena arrived at her office early, eager to start her day's work. But when she opened the door, she froze. The air in the room felt ... different, heavier. The mirror on the far wall, an antique piece she had never noticed before, glinted strangely in the morning light. Lena had never seen it there before. She didn't even remember installing it. And yet, it was unmistakable. The reflection was distorted, the surface rippling in a way that made her stomach churn. Lena took a step back, her heartbeat quickening. No, this wasn't possible. She knew. She hadn't put that mirror there. It wasn't even her style then. From the reflection, she heard a dot whispering. Not her own voice, but a soft murmur like the echo of someone else's words. "You're in here too." Lena's pulse raced. She was frozen, unable to look away from the mirror. Was she hallucinating? No. This wasn't like anything she had ever experienced before. She didn't hear things. She saw things. Slowly, her hand reached out for the door, her breath shallow, and she whispered to herself, "It's just a trick. It's just a trick." But her reflection smiled back at her. Dr. Lena Moritz didn't remember how she made it out of her office. One moment, she was standing, frozen in front of the mirror, and the next she was outside, her palms pressed against the cold metal of the elevator doors, her breaths coming in shallow bursts. She forced herself to calm down. "It's just a hallucination," she told herself. "Just a product of stress." She had been working non-stop for weeks. The cases were piling up, her patients increasingly bizarre delusions clouding her thoughts, and Sarah's session was still lingering in her mind. But that was all it was, stress, her mind playing tricks. The elevator doors opened, and Lena stepped in, forcing her focus onto the numbers above her head. The reflection in the steel walls was normal, her image, tired but real. But a small, unbidden thought slithered into her mind. What if the reflection isn't the one that's real? Lena shook her head, brushing the thought aside. She had been a psychologist for too long to fall prey to simple delusions, but the nagging feeling refused to go away. She could still hear the whisper, the echo of the words she'd heard in the mirror. "You're in here too." The phrase repeated itself in her mind like a distorted loop. The elevator dinged and she stepped out into the lobby. She was halfway to the exit when she noticed something strange. The receptionist wasn't at her desk. The office was silent, the usual background hum of phones ringing and murmured conversations absent. Lena slowed, her footsteps faltering. There were always people around at this hour. She glanced at the clock, 9:45 a.m. on any normal day. The office would be bustling by now. She pushed open the door to the hallway, her gaze sweeping the vacant space. The walls were lined with abstract art pieces she had never really paid attention to. Today, they seemed to shift in the corners of her vision. She couldn't explain it. It was like the space itself was warping, the angles stretching and contracting as if it were alive, breathing. A sudden thought struck her. The mirror. What if I'm still in there? Her heart rate spiked. The sensation of being watched, of being pulled back into the room, gripped her with an icy vice. She spun on her heel and rushed back to her office. But when she reached the door, she hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready to confront whatever had happened. What if it wasn't a hallucination? What if it was real? Still, she pushed open the door, half expecting to see the mirror waiting for her, its surface glinting with malevolent intent. But the room was exactly as it had been when she left it, empty, unchanged. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the soft squeak of the chair beneath her feet were the only sounds in the otherwise still air. Lena exhaled in relief. It was just a trick of the mind. She must have been tired, and when she'd looked into the mirror, her mind had fabricated the experience, twisting reality. But as she moved to sit behind her desk, something caught her eye. The mirror was still there, and it wasn't a hallucination. She could see it clearly now, an ornate piece, an antique with a frame of dark wood, carved with intricate patterns. It was larger than it had been before, almost too large, and when she looked into it, her reflection was standing unnaturally still. Lena froze, her gaze locking with her own reflection. This was wrong. This was so wrong. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, and the air in the room seemed to grow heavier, thick with a presence she couldn't explain. The reflection didn't smile this time. It didn't blink either. It simply stood there, its eyes locked on hers, unwavering, unblinking. And then, in the silence of the room, Lena heard the whisper again. "Not what you think, not what you think." Her breath hitched in her throat. The voice was ... different this time. It wasn't a mere echo like the one she had heard in the elevator. This voice had weight, a texture to it that made her insides twist. It was familiar, but not in the way a voice should be. It was distant, yet close. Cold, but suffocating. Almost like it was too close. Lena stepped back, her fingers trembling as she reached for the chair behind her. Her reflection, as if sensing her retreat, shifted slightly, its gaze following her movement. It was subtle, so subtle, but she was certain of it. The reflection was moving with her. Her heart skipped a beat. She wanted to look away, to turn her back on it and pretend she hadn't seen it, but she couldn't. The mirror had ensnared her. It wasn't just a reflection. It was a window into something deeper, darker. Something ... wrong ... It's just a mirror, she told herself. It's just glass, and light, and angles. You're imagining things. This is normal. Mirrors don't have power. They're just reflections. But even as she thought this, the whispering grew louder, more insistent. The words were impossible to ignore now. They seemed to surround her, filling the room, reverberating off the walls. They were coming from all directions. It's already too late. Lena stumbled backward, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She was about to turn and flee when she caught a glimpse of the reflection in the corner of her eye. Her reflection smiled. It wasn't her smile, it was ... something else, something twisted. It was the kind of smile that didn't belong on a human face. And then the reflection did something that sent a chill down Lena's spine. It waved. Lena's breath hitched as the real world seemed to fracture for a moment, and then, as if snapping, back into place. The room was just as it had been before, still, silent, but the feeling lingered. Something had changed. She wasn't sure how or why, but she knew that the reflection in the mirror wasn't the only thing in the room with her anymore. She couldn't explain it, but she had to know more. The echoing room wasn't just a concept. It wasn't a mere psychological anomaly. It was real, and somehow it was calling to her. Lena spent the night in a haze, the hours slipping by unnoticed as her mind refused to rest. The reflection in the mirror gnawed at her thoughts, relentless and insistent. No matter how hard she tried to distract herself, no matter how many cups of tea she drank or how many pages she turned in her textbooks, the image of her own face, unnaturally still and smiling, clung to her like a nightmare that wouldn't end. She should have gone home. She knew that, but somehow, the idea of leaving her office felt impossible, like stepping away from the epicenter of some deep, unknowable force. It was as though if she stepped out of the room, she would be severed from the thread of reality altogether. Around 3 a.m., after pacing for hours, Lena finally gave in. She needed to return to the office, needed to understand what was happening. The mirror ... It wasn't just an object anymore. It was an anchor, a tether to something else. The door to her office creaked open. She expected to be met with the same sterile, comforting calm of the place she'd left behind just hours earlier, but no. The moment she stepped inside, the air was thick, heavy with a presence that felt suffocating. There was a strange hum in the room, a low, vibrating sound that filled the space, curling into her ears. The mirror was there, as it had been before, but something was different. The distortion in its surface was more pronounced. It rippled, like water disturbed by an unseen force. And her reflection wasn't still anymore. It was moving. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She tried to look away, to snap herself out of the trance the mirror was pulling her into, but her feet refused to move. She couldn't look away. She needed to understand. Her reflection in the mirror blinked and smiled. The smile wasn't the same as before. This time it was wide and unsettling, like it belonged to something else entirely, something other. It wasn't the soft curve of her lips that smiled. No, the smile stretched too far, the corners curling in a way that felt wrong. "Come closer," the reflection whispered, its voice a perfect mimic of her own. Lena's hands trembled as she reached for her desk, grasping the edge of it to steady herself. She tried to pull herself away, but the pull of the mirror was stronger now, more insistent, as though the very fabric of her reality was being tugged in two directions. "No, ... she whispered under her breath, willing herself to take control. "It's just ... a trick of the mind." But the reflection in the mirror did not stop. It took a step forward, its movements perfectly synchronized with hers. It wasn't merely mimicking her actions. No, this was something else. This reflection was aware. Lena's heart hammered in her chest as she took a step back, but her reflection remained. It did not retreat. It leaned closer. "You're still here," the voice in the mirror said, low and soft, "but you won't be for long." Lena stumbled backward, her mind reeling. Her reflection continued to smile, but the smile was stretched unnaturally wide now. Too wide. She blinked, and for a split second the reflection seemed to glitch, a ripple passing over its surface. Something was wrong with it. The edges of the reflection distorted as if the mirror was struggling to hold on to the image of her. Suddenly, she realized what was happening. This wasn't a hallucination. It couldn't be. Hallucinations didn't change the way reality itself bent around you. They didn't make you feel like you were becoming someone else, like you were losing control of your very identity. This was something more. The room felt colder. The whispering was growing louder, more insistent, until Lena could hear it, not only in her ears but in her head. It wasn't her thoughts anymore. It was something else. Something ancient, something old. The door behind her creaked, pulling her attention away from the mirror. Lena turned, her gaze darting to the hallway, but there was nothing there. Still, her gut told her something had changed. A shift, barely perceptible, had occurred. She turned back to the mirror. Her reflection was no longer smiling. It was grinning. Jagged, vicious grin that stretched too wide, too far. And its eyes, those eyes were filled with something other than recognition. "This is your doing," the reflection said, its voice echoing inside her skull. "You opened the door, you saw it. And now, it has you." Lena's heart skipped a beat. What did that mean? What door? What had she opened? Before she could think of an answer, the reflection's grin began to twist again. The image in the mirror melted for a brief moment. It wasn't her face that stared back at her anymore. It was something else, an empty, hollow version of herself. Her eyes were vacant like a doll's, and her mouth was open in a silent scream. Her breath hitched, and her pulse surged as panic began to creep in. She had to get away from the mirror. She needed to leave this place before whatever this was consumed her entirely. Lena turned to run, but as she moved, the whispering followed her. The room itself seemed to move, to bend in ways it shouldn't. The hallway stretched out before her, impossibly long, its walls narrowing, and the flickering of the lights overhead added to the surreal atmosphere. It was as if the very structure of the building had begun to shift, reforming itself in response to the whispers. She slammed into the door of the stairwell, her hands fumbling with the handle, desperate to escape the growing pressure. Her heart raced, and the whispers filled her ears, louder and louder, until they drowned out all other sound. "You cannot leave. Not now. Not ever." The door opened with a sharp squeal, and Lena stumbled into the stairwell, gasping for air. But as she began to descend, something caught her eye. At the base of the stairs was the mirror. It wasn't just in her office anymore. It was everywhere. Her reflection in the mirror, no longer trapped within the boundaries of the glass, stood at the bottom of the stairs. It grinned again, its eyes wide with madness, and then the voice came again, this time deeper, more suffocating, as if it were emerging from the walls themselves. "You are already here." Lena's scream echoed through the stairwell, swallowed by the weight of the room that seemed to close in around her. Lena's heart thundered in her chest as her fingers curled around the cold, weathered handle of the door. The air felt thick, as though the very atmosphere was holding its breath, waiting. Every instinct in her screamed for her to stop, to turn away, to run, but the pull of the door, the promise of escape, or perhaps something far worse, was overwhelming. The whispers, now a cacophony of voices, filled the space around her, pressing in from all sides. "Don't do it," they hissed. "You don't know what you're asking for. Not this door, not this path." But Lena could barely hear them anymore. Their words were drowned out by the pounding of her heart, the pulse in her ears. Something deep within her was urging her forward, something primal, something that had long been buried, forgotten in the corners of her mind, was clawing its way to the surface without thinking. She twisted the handle. The door didn't creak or groan as it opened. It simply gave way, like it had been waiting for her touch. She stepped inside, the overwhelming darkness of the room swallowing her whole. For a moment, there was only silence. Lena blinked, her eyes struggling to adjust to the deep, suffocating blackness that surrounded her. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps as she instinctively reached out, her hand groping for the walls. But there were no walls, no surface, just empty air. And then, from the darkness, something began to shift. A low, guttural sound, like the shifting of stone or the groan of ancient wood, echoed around her. Slowly, she felt the presence of something ancient, something vast. It was as if the very space was alive, breathing around her, pulsing with an intelligence older than time. Lena's skin prickled as she felt the air grow heavier, denser, as if it were thickening around her. Her chest tightened with every breath, the weight of the place pressing down on her. The whispers, no longer disembodied, grew louder, more insistent. She could feel them now, inside her mind, clawing at her consciousness. "You shouldn't have come here," a voice whispered, its tone cold and ancient. "This place doesn't belong to you." She tried to speak, to ask where she was, but the words lodged in her throat, heavy and unformed. The darkness shifted again, and for the briefest of moments she saw it dash them figures, not entirely human, floating in the void. Their bodies were contorted, their limbs twisted in unnatural angles, their faces that weren't quite faces, but masks blurred indistinct shapes, flickering in and out of existence. The air around them crackled, thick with an energy that sent shivers down her spine. The figures moved toward her, and she took an instinctive step back, but there was nowhere to go. The room was endless, stretching in all directions, and the figures were closing in on her, each step they took sending ripples through the darkness, distorting the very fabric of reality around them. "Do you know what you've done?" One of the figures spoke. Its voice was 1,000 voices layered together, overlapping and reverberating through the air. It was both distant and intimate at the same time. "You've called us here. You've opened the door to our world." Lena's heart skipped a beat. The door, the room, the mirror, the echoes. She realized, with a sickening lurch in her stomach, that this place wasn't just a part of her mind, it was something else. A realm that existed between spaces, between thoughts. A place that was never meant to be found. "You don't belong here, Lena," the voice continued. "But now that you've opened the door, you're part of it, part of us." Lena stumbled backward, her breath coming in short gasps. She wanted to scream, but no sound left her mouth. She wanted to run, but the darkness seemed to press in around her, closing off every exit. The figures were too close now, their distorted faces twisting in the dark like broken reflections in a shattered mirror. The whispers were deafening now, all around her, inside her mind. They weren't speaking in words anymore. They were feelings, primal emotions that clawed at her mind, pulling her deeper into the void. The hunger, the cold, the emptiness. Lena closed her eyes, but it didn't help. The dark was inside her now. It was consuming her. But then there was a sound, a crack. Her eyes shot open. The figures were frozen in place, their twisted forms suspended in the air, staring at her with those blank, unseeing eyes. The room around her shuddered, as if reality itself was shaking. The darkness that had once felt so suffocating now felt thinner, like it was losing its grip on her. A ripple ran through the space, distorting the figures. For a split second, Lena saw it's the mirror. It was in front of her again, suspended in the blackness, like a portal, reflecting everything that was happening around her. The figures flinched, as if afraid of the mirror. Their forms wavered, flickering in and out of existence, as though they couldn't remain solid in its presence. "It's not supposed to be here," one of the figures hissed, its voice splintering as if it was being torn apart. "You don't understand. You've brought it." Lena didn't understand, but she felt it. The mirror, the thing that had been following her, beckoning to her, was connected to whatever these things were. It was the anchor, the doorway, it was the key. Her mind raced. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to use it. Without thinking, without knowing why, Lena reached for the mirror. As her fingers brushed against the surface, the figures shrieked, their forms warping, distorting in ways that made her stomach twist. The mirror pulsed under her touch, and for the briefest of moments, Lena thought she saw something behind the glass, her reflection. But it wasn't her anymore. It was something else, something darker, something hungry. And then, the room exploded. The darkness shattered, breaking apart like glass. The mirror pulsed once more, sending a shockwave through the space. And everything elapsed in on itself. Lena's mind screamed, but there was nothing left to hold on to. She was falling through the darkness, through the cracks in reality, through the echoes. And then, there was nothing. When Lena opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was light, blinding, pure and all-encompassing. It wasn't the dim, suffocating darkness she had left behind, but something warm, familiar, safe for a moment. She thought she was back in her apartment, lying on her bed after a restless night's sleep. The sheets were soft, the air smelled of lavender and fresh linen. She felt the cool, gentle pressure of her own body against the mattress. She even heard the faint hum of traffic outside her window, the sound of the world moving on as it always did. But the peace was short-lived. Sharp pain shot through her head, as if something had pierced the very core of her skull. She gasped, her breath ragged, and with it came a rush of fragmented memories, too many, all at once. The mirror, the door, the figures, the endless void, the whispers, their voices echoing, still lingering in the corners of her mind. Her hand shot up to her forehead, trembling, as she tried to steady herself. She was no longer in her apartment. She was somewhere else, somewhere she couldn't name. Lena tried to sit up, but her body felt wrong. The space around her was shifting, warping. She could see the walls of the room, but they weren't fixed. They seemed to ripple, bending and stretching like some sort of liquid landscape. Every time she blinked, the room changed. It wasn't stable, not real. That, and then, from the corner of her eye, she saw it, a figure. Standing in the doorway, Lena's breath caught in her throat. She froze. It wasn't one of the twisted beings she had seen in the void, but it was close. This figure had the same blurry, shifting quality to it. Its form was human, but only barely. Its features were indistinct, like trying to remember a dream from which you'd just woken. "Lena," the figure spoke, its voice distant, yet piercing. "You're awake now." The voice felt familiar, but at the same time, didn't. It was as though it came from a place far beyond the words themselves, a place that had no beginning or end, like it was spoken from within the folds of time. Lena's pulse quickened. Her hands were shaking now, her grip tightening on the edge of the bed. Her thoughts were scattered. Her mind was still trying to make sense of everything, but she couldn't focus. It was as if the world itself was unraveling around her, and the more she tried to hold on to it, the more it slipped away. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. It didn't sound like her own voice. It sounded distant, disembodied, like it was coming from somewhere else. The figure took a slow step forward, its movements too fluid, like it didn't quite belong in the same reality as Lena. It was as though the space itself bent around the figure's presence. "You've been in between for a long time now," it replied, its tone almost compassionate. "But it's over. The door is closed." Lena's mind spun. The door. She had opened it, she had walked through it, she had fallen through it, but now she was here, wherever here was. "I don't understand," Lena breathed, her head spinning. She could feel the walls of the room pressing in on her, distorting, folding inward with each blink. She couldn't grasp it, couldn't make sense of what was real anymore. What's happening? What's going on? The figure tilted its head, and for the first time Lena saw its face, its true face. It was a distortion, just like the mirror, like her own reflection in the glass. But it was also something familiar, something intimate. It was her face, but wrong, faded, devoid of any warmth. "You've crossed a threshold, Lena," it said softly, its voice now distant, like it was speaking through layers of reality. "And the door you opened will never close, not for you, not for anyone." Lena's stomach dropped. She knew the words were important. They meant something she couldn't yet understand, but her thoughts felt fragmented, scattered, like broken glass. She glanced around the room again, but nothing made sense. The walls were in constant flux. The floor beneath her feet rippled like water, its surface barely holding onto its shape, and the light that wasn't natural, wasn't real. It pulsed, fluctuating in intensity, as though it existed in multiple states at once. "What is this place?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "What's happening to me?" The figure didn't answer right away. Instead, it raised its hand slowly, deliberately, and pointed toward the far wall. Lena followed its gesture, her eyes tracking the movement. There, in the distance, was something she hadn't noticed before. A doorway. It was just like the one she had walked through earlier, an impossibly tall, wide wooden door, framed with strange symbols, its surface dark and weathered. Lena's heart skipped a beat. No, not again. Not the door. The figure smiled, but the smile was wrong, distorted like a mask. "It's time to leave," it said, its voice low and ominous. "The path you've chosen will lead you to places you can't." The return from Lena's body froze. She didn't want to move, didn't want to follow the figure's gaze, but her eyes locked onto the door. It called to her in the same way the mirror had. It wasn't just a door, it was a choice. The one choice that had always been there, hanging over her like a dark cloud. Her thoughts flashed back to the mirror, its endless surface, reflecting something darker, something other than her. And the voice, that whisper, always present, always pulling her in. But she couldn't go back. She couldn't go back to the void, to the distorted place beyond the door. It had nearly consumed her, nearly torn apart her mind. So why was she drawn to this door now? Why did it feel like the only thing that could save her? The figure took another step closer, its presence almost suffocating, its form now flickering in and out of focus. "You can't fight it," it said. "You've already chosen, Lena. You've always chosen, you just don't know it yet." The words felt like a blow to her chest. Her mind raced, trying to process everything at once. She was trapped. She had opened the door before, and now it was too late. There was no escaping this place, no leaving. And then, as if to confirm it, the door swung open by itself, revealing nothing but an endless stretch of darkness beyond it. The doorway seemed to stretch into the horizon, endless and foreboding. Lena's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was where it had all led. The door wasn't just a passage to somewhere else, it was a passage into herself, into the very core of what she had become, what she had opened. The figure smiled one last time, its face distorting into something unrecognizably something that wasn't quite human anymore. "It's time, Lena," it whispered. "Step through, and you will finally understand." Lena's hand trembled as she took a step forward, but then something inside her shifted. No, she couldn't go through that door, not yet, because she had realized something. She wasn't the one trapped in the doorway, she was the one who had opened it. Lena stood frozen before the door, her hand still suspended in midair, the air around her thick with a sense of finality. The figure, its shape flickering in the shifting light, loomed just behind her. The door beckoned, its dark abyss stretching beyond, whispering promises of answers, of release, of understanding. But she could feel it. Deep down, somewhere in the marrow of her bones, she felt the truth. This was no simple choice. The darkness beyond wasn't just a doorway, it was an invitation to dissolve into something else, something unknown. And if she walked through it, there would be no coming back. No more trying to piece together what had happened. No more struggling to escape. She was standing on the edge of a precipice, and beyond it lay not just an answer, but the end of her. Lena's breath hitched as she glanced over her shoulder at the figure behind her, the thing that was both a guide and a prison. Its eyes, or what passed for eyes, were hollow pits, watching her every move, studying her with that cold, knowing gaze. There was no mercy in those eyes. There was no sympathy, just an understanding that went far beyond what a human mind could comprehend. "You still don't understand, do you?" the figure asked, its voice low, almost too soft. "You think you have a choice, but this has always been your path. You've always known. We've always known." Lena's pulse raced, her throat tightened. "Who are you?" she choked out, though the question felt almost meaningless now. What difference did it make? This thing was no more real than the mirror, no more real than the whispers that had chased her throughout this nightmare, and yet, she couldn't deny that it had power. It knew things. The figure didn't respond at first. It tilted its head, its form blurring and then solidifying again. It was as if it was seeing her, not as a person, but as something far less tangible, something to be understood. "We are what you have become, Lena, what you always were before you even realized. We are the echoes of the door you opened, the path you crossed. You called us here with your own mind, with your own will. The mirror is just a reflection, a thin veil between what you know and what you want to know." Lena's eyes burned as the words seeped into her like poison. She wanted to scream. She wanted to rip herself away from all of this, from the lies, from the illusions. But the truth was settling in like a weight that crushed her lungs and curled its fingers around her heart. She thought back to the mirror, the thing she had once seen as a mere object, something to distract her. But it wasn't just a reflection. It had been a warning, a reminder, a bridge between worlds, between who she thought she was and the truth of what she had become. Her eyes flitted to the door again. The darkness beyond it swirled like a living thing, writhing, beckoning her. And yet, despite the terror it stirred in her, despite everything she knew was at stake, there was a pull, a magnetic force that threatened to tear her apart. "Why do I feel like I'm being pushed toward it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure didn't answer directly. Instead, it stepped closer, the edges of its form beginning to stretch and fragment like a broken reflection in a cracked mirror. "You think you're being pushed, but that's the lie," it said, its voice now a quiet, haunting murmur. "You've always been walking toward it. It's in you. It's part of you. The door isn't some external thing, Lena. It's a piece of your mind, a splinter of your soul." Lena's breath hitched again, the words twisted inside her, knotting together with the chaos that had been building in her mind since she first saw the mirror. No, this couldn't be true. She hadn't chosen this. She hadn't sought it out, had she? The figure continued, its voice curling around her thoughts, threading its way into her consciousness. "You've always sought the door, always searched for the way out. But the truth is, there was never a way out. You are the door. You've always been." Lena staggered back, her knees trembling beneath her. She couldn't breathe. Her head spun. The figure reached out, and Lena flinched, but it didn't touch her. Instead, it gestured to the space around them. The room, no, the world shuddered. The walls seemed to collapse into themselves, as if reality were fragile, barely holding together. The air thickened, the room stretched, and then time itself began to fracture. Lena's stomach lurched as she felt it rip in the fabric of reality. It was like an explosion of images, memories that weren't hers. The first time she saw the mirror, the way it had called to her, the moments she had spent staring at her reflection, and how, despite the nausea it had caused her, she had been drawn to it. To her, the whispers that had led her, the subtle, gradual shifts in her perception of the world. It wasn't just the mirror. It wasn't just the door. It had all been connected, a thread woven into the very core of her mind. "You see now," the figure said softly, almost tenderly. "It wasn't the door that found you, it was you who found it." Lena's mind recoiled at the truth. Her pulse quickened, a surge of terror rising in her chest. The world around her began to ripple like water disturbed by an unseen force. She could hear the faint crackling of something breaking, reality itself splintering. She turned toward the door once more, her heart pounding. Beyond it, the darkness awaited. It wasn't just an empty space, it was a reflection of everything she had ever been, a mirror of her own fractured mind. The figure's voice was softer now, its tone almost pitying. "You've already crossed the line, Lena, you've already opened the door. But the choice isn't in stepping through. The choice is what happens when you stay, when you see what lies beyond the veil, when you finally understand." Lena shook her head violently, her hand reaching for the doorframe. It was no longer an invitation, it was a trap. She couldn't go through it. But then, a realization struck her with brutal force. What if there was no choice? What if the door had always been inside her and it wasn't meant to be opened but faced? Lena's vision blurred as the whispers rose to a deafening crescendo. The figure's form continued to flicker, becoming less tangible by the second. It was shifting, but then something in her shifted too. She turned toward the door, her mind settling with an eerie clarity. "I don't have to go through," she whispered to herself. "I just have to stop running." With a deep breath, she closed her eyes, letting the pressure of the door, the weight of the universe behind it, press against her mind. And for the first time since she had found the mirror, she finally understood. Lena's heart pounded, each beat resonating like a drum in her chest. She was standing at the threshold of the door, the thing that had haunted her every step, every thought, every moment since the mirror had first whispered her name. It called to her, that dark abyss beyond the frame. It was everything she had sought, everything she had been terrified to face. And yet, as the figure behind her seemed to fade, its presence a mere flicker in the growing chaos of the world around her, Lena realized something. The door wasn't just a passage to another place, it was the fracture in her own mind, a manifestation of her own desire. Everything, every decision, every moment of doubt, every whisper she had heard in the dark had been leading her here. This was the final confrontation, not between her and the door, but between her and herself. The figure's voice, now distant and almost lost in the swirling chaos, called out to her one last time. "You can't run from yourself, Lena. You never could." Lena clenched her fists at her sides. The air around her thickened, warping like a nightmare. The ground beneath her feet began to ripple, and the world stretched outward into an infinite void. She could see flashes, fragments of memories she had long buried deep within herself. Images of her childhood, a broken family, moments where she had been told she was too much, too different, too distant. But these memories weren't just her bone, they shifted, morphing into something unfamiliar, something far darker. The faces in the fragments twisted and stretched. She saw people, but they weren't her parents, they weren't her friends. They were shadows, versions of herself, reflections of choices she had never made but had always considered. Her fingers tingled as they hovered just above the doorframe. The whispers surged again, louder than ever, swirling around her, crashing into her mind, each voice calling for a different choice, a different path. But one thing remained clear. There was only one choice left, one step. If she went through, the door would collapse her into nothingness, the endless fall of nothing but her fractured soul. She would dissolve into the echo of everything she had become. And if she didn't, Lena had no idea. But maybe, just maybe, it would be the first time she was truly free. Free of the pull, free of the dark space in her chest, free of the thing that had been hunting her. As if in response to her thoughts, the darkness pulsed. The door trembled, its surface crackling with energy. She could feel the pull in her gut, like a thread tugging her toward it. The emptiness beyond the door seemed to be waiting, patient, unyielding. But then she remembered the figure's words. It wasn't the door that found her, it was she who had found the door. The choice was hers, and it always had been. Lena's gaze shifted back to the doorframe. Her reflection, her true reflection, was there, staring back at her. Not a perfect image, not a sanitized version, but a raw, distorted reflection. It was a face she had never wanted to face. But now, staring into that fractured mirror, Lena, I saw it clearly. The door had always been inside her. The door was a manifestation of the deepest parts of her mind, the parts she had locked away, buried under layers of doubt, shame and guilt. She had been running from herself, running from the person she feared she would become. The door had been an escape, a temptation, but in truth, she couldn't escape who she was. The truth had been staring her in the face all along. Lena stepped closer to the door. The world around her trembled violently. The walls around her cracked, the light flickering like a dying star. The figure behind her, the thing that had been following her, guiding her, trapping her, reappeared. It was no longer solid, no longer human. It flickered, its form bending, unraveling into what seemed like 1,000 shards of herself, echoes of what she feared. "You can't stop it now," the figure croaked, its voice splitting in multiple tones. "This is who you are. This is who you've always been. You think you can change it. You think you can walk away. You are nothing but this door. You are nothing but the choices you make, and you've already chosen." Lena's vision blurred, but she stood firm, refusing to turn away. She would not be swayed. She would not be consumed. The figure raised a hand, its fingers stretching unnaturally, reaching for her throat. "You will never escape your reflection," it hissed, 1,000 voices weaving through its words. "You are already lost." Lena didn't flinch. She stepped forward, and the door shuddered. She could feel it now, not just as a physical presence but as a mental one. The weight of every decision, every fragmented piece of herself that had been shattered over the years, was pulling together. She was no longer running from the door. She was no longer running from herself. The figure lunged, but its form was unraveling, cracking apart like glass. Its voice became a cacophony of screams, of memories and regrets. But they no longer held power over her. In the last instant, as her hand reached for the doorframe, Lena understood. The door was never the problem. It wasn't a thing to fear or flee from. It was simply the reflection of her mind, her spirit. The moment she opened it, she was not confronting some ancient force or unknown entity. She was confronting the very core of who she was. And now, she had a choice: to step through and become a shadow of herself, or to stay and face her past, her fractured soul, and heal. With a deep breath, Lena closed her eyes, feeling the darkness around her pulse swirl. She felt it all: the weight, the pain, the fear, but this time, it didn't control her. For the first time in her life, she embraced it, and with a single deliberate movement, she turned away from the door. The moment Lena turned away from the door, the world around her fractured. For a brief instant, everything went silent. The air, once thick with the whispers and the weight of decisions, felt still, as if reality itself was holding its breath. The figure, the thing that had guided her, pursued her, and haunted her, flickered and screamed in multiple voices, its form collapsing in on itself like a dying star. Lena stood still, her eyes closed, breathing deeply, letting the silence settle in. The ground beneath her feet no longer rippled, and the oppressive darkness in the air had started to thin. For the first time since she had stepped into this world of fractured reflections, she felt a sense of clarity. The door, the thing that had once felt like the key to everything, was now nothing more than a shadow in her mind, no longer a passage to another realm, but a symbol of everything she had feared: her past, her insecurities, her guilt. The echoes of the door's call faded. The voice of the figure became a distant murmur, like the final whispers of a fading dream. The room around her, the warped liquid space that had once bent and shifted, grew still, as if settling into a shape she could understand. And then, the first sound broke the silence. It was her own breath, a sound she hadn't heard in what felt like lifetimes. The gentle rise and fall of her chest, steady and real. She opened her eyes. The room had returned to something solid, something tangible. The walls no longer shifted. The floor no longer rippled. The oppressive, suffocating weight of the atmosphere had lifted. It wasn't perfect. The edges were still jagged, and the space felt slightly off-kilter, like the remnants of a broken dream. But it was real. Lena took a slow, tentative step forward. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, in her fingertips. It was a physical sensation, grounded in the here and now, unlike the sensation of being adrift in a fractured reality. And then her gaze shifted to the mirror. It stood on the far wall, silent, like it had been waiting for her all this time. The mirror, once an object of terror, now felt different. The glass, smooth and unmarred, reflected her own face. Not a fractured, distorted version, but her face. A face marked by pain, by fear, by everything she had endured. But this time, the reflection didn't twist or shift. It held steady. For the first time, it didn't look back at her with accusation or fear. It looked at her as if it understood. Lena stepped toward it, her heart in her throat. As she moved closer, she felt the pull again, the familiar magnetic tug that had drawn her in for so long. But this time, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't running. She stood before the mirror, staring at her reflection, seeing it for what it was, not an image to be feared, but a part of herself that had been buried for too long. A part that she had denied, ignored, and blamed for everything that had gone wrong. but it was time to face it. Lena raised her hand, her fingers trembling, and placed them against the cool surface of the glass. She felt a jolt of energy, a hum, beneath her skin, as if the mirror itself was alive. But this time it wasn't hostile. It wasn't trying to consume her. It was a quiet invitation. For a long moment she stood there, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She wasn't sure what would happen next. She didn't know if there was a way to undo the damage she had caused, or if this moment would be the end of everything. But she knew one thing. She was ready to face whatever came next. Her fingers pressed harder against the glass, and in that instant the reflection before her began to shift. Slowly, like the turning of a page in a book, the image blurred. For a brief moment, Lena felt herself slipping into the mirror, as though it was pulling her in, drawing her into the very core of her being. But then, something miraculous happened. The mirror began to dissolve. The glass cracked, not with a shattering crash, but with a soft, almost reverent sound, like the breaking of old barriers, old fears. The reflections fractured and peeled away, falling apart like dust. Lena's heart skipped a beat as she felt a warmth rush through her, a warmth that spread from her chest, filling her limbs, her head, her very soul. It was as if the mirror itself was shedding the weight of everything it had held, every fear, every regret, every fragment of doubt. The crack spidered across the glass, and for the first time, Lena saw light, not the cold, distant light of the void, but a warm, soft light that seemed to envelop her from within. Lena closed her eyes as the warmth intensified, her body trembling, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. She could feel something shifting inside her, like a lock turning, a knot unraveling. She had faced her reflection, and in doing so, she had faced herself. The last of the mirror's fragments dissolved into the air, leaving nothing but a faint shimmer in its place. The room around her, once a warped nightmare, had begun to heal. The walls, the floor, the air, everything felt solid, real, and whole. She opened her eyes. The darkness that had once pressed in on her had vanished. The oppressive force that had been following her, that had been pulling her into the void, was gone. The figure of the entity that had twisted her reality had faded into nothingness. It was as if it had never been. Lena stood alone, in the silence, in the peace. The world around her felt infinitely different, like she had just crossed some invisible threshold, one she could never return from. But that was okay. The pull toward the door, the pull toward the reflection had ended. She was no longer trapped in her own mind, no longer a prisoner of her past. And for the first time, Lena understood what freedom meant. She was whole. She was no longer running from the door. She had created her own path. With a steady breath, Lena turned away from the mirror. The room was now quiet, serene. There was no longer any sense of fracture, of distortion. It was a place of clarity, of understanding. And as she walked toward the exit, toward the next step of her life, she knew one thing for certain. The door had never held the key. She had. Lena stepped forward, her feet light against the floor, as if each step was a rebirth, a reclaiming of something long lost. The room behind her, the place of fractured reflections, the echoes of her past, was fading. It was no longer a space of dread, but a chapter she had closed. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The world before her stretched out a canvas not yet marred by fear or regret, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she was truly here. The air felt different, fresher, freer. She could feel the soft hum of the world around her, the quiet pulse of life, the gentle rise and fall of the earth itself beneath her feet. It was subtle, but undeniable. She had shed the weight of her mind's endless wars. She had embraced the parts of herself she had spent years running from. She was whole, and she could feel the shift in her heart, the tension that had twisted and knotted itself there since childhood. Since the moment she had first glimpsed the mirror, the thing that had haunted her every thought had unraveled. There was peace. There was clarity. But peace didn't mean an absence of challenges. It meant the ability to face them without fear. The door she had left behind had no longer been a door at all. It had been a mirror, a reflection of all her choices, all her hesitations, her wounds, and her regrets. By walking away from it, she had made the most important choice of all, the only one that truly mattered: to live. And that was the most terrifying and most freeing thing she had ever done. As Lena walked through the quiet room, past the remnants of the fractured world she had left behind, she felt a strange, almost imperceptible tug, like a whisper from the past. She stopped, her breath catching. It was the faintest echo, a murmur from deep within. Her gaze shifted to the corner of the room, to the small familiar shape that was almost too soft to notice at first. The mirror shattered now, fragments scattered across the floor was still there, but it wasn't the same. The glass no longer shimmered with the dark energy that had once twisted her reality. It no longer held the fractured reflections of the self she had run from. The edges where the glass had cracked now glowed with a soft, pale light that was warm, inviting, peaceful. Lena crouched down, her fingers brushing gently over the shards. For a moment she thought she could see her reflection again, but this time it was clear. It wasn't distorted, it wasn't twisted, it was simply her raw, unguarded, human, and she smiled. Not a nervous, uncertain smile, but a genuine one, the first one in what felt like forever. She rose slowly, standing tall. The mirror was no longer a symbol of her fear, of her need to escape. It had become a part of her healing, a reminder that even broken things could find their way back to light, to wholeness. Lena didn't need the mirror to see herself anymore. She was no longer running. A shift in the atmosphere, a slight breeze caught her attention. She turned her head toward the exit. A door, simple and unadorned, stood at the far end of the room. Waiting. Lena walked toward it, the faintest of smiles still playing on her lips. There was no hesitation now, no fear, just the quiet certainty that whatever lay beyond, she was ready. And as she stepped through the door, the light outside flooded in. It was morning. The world was alive, bathed in soft sunlight, fresh and new. Everything seemed clearer, sharper, more vivid than it ever had before. The colors of the sky, the rustling of the leaves in the trees, everything had a new depth, a new richness, as if she was seeing it for the first time. She breathed in deeply, the scent of earth, of rain, of something renewed, filling her lungs. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the world wash over her. She was alive and she was free. The shadows of the past no longer weighed her down. The reflection in the mirror, broken and scattered as it had been, was no longer a prison. It was simply part of the journey, part of the story. And the story, Lena realized, wasn't over, it was just beginning. You've walked beside Lena through every dark turn, every fractured reflection. You felt the weight of the choices, the burden of the unknown. But now, the story has come to an end. Or has it? The door is still open. The journey hasn't ended just because the page is turned. It's up to you now. Will you keep running from your own reflections, from the truths buried deep within? Or will you choose to step through the door, face the pieces of yourself you've hidden, and unlock the power to rebuild? The mirror isn't just a symbol, it's a challenge, an invitation. And the question remains, what will you do when your own reflection calls you? The door is open. What are you waiting for?